from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast. I am Reverend Charles Harrison with Reverend Terry Webster Sr. And on this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about this whole issue of gun violence in America, and certainly as it disproportionately impacts Black Americans. And one of the concerns is the easy access to guns, particularly by young people. And we want to talk about this whole issue of easy access and the issue of legislation banning assault weapons. That's going to be our topic today. Stay tuned. Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And this is Reverend Charles Harrison, and I am with Reverend Terry Webster Sr. How you doing?
Man, it's Friday.
It's Friday.
He died on Friday, but early Sunday morning.
Amen.
He got up from the grave.
Amen.
So we are moving towards Sunday morning, so the weekend is always good.
I know. Yesterday we were a part of a press conference here in the city, and we talked about the whole issue of the violence in the city. And a part of the conversation prior to the press conference was a conversation that some of us were having, clergy and community leaders with each other, about, some of the root causes of the violence that we are seeing. And certainly disproportionately, we know that it's impacting communities of color more. But the whole issue that some people are raising, not just here locally, but nationally, is the whole issue of the easy access to guns, that this easy access to guns in the hands of young people, particularly young males, is leading to so much of the violence. And people are talking about, how do we address that issue? How do we stop the flow of these guns, in the hands of young people, that tends to lead to so much of the violence that we are seeing? And I was just looking, Reverend Webster, over these numbers, and it was talking about that gun violence is on the rise in the United States, but it is particularly surging among young people who are brown and Black. And these are the numbers for those who are listening to us. Young Black males ages 15 to 34, that number's rising. It used to be 15 to 24, experience the highest rate of gun homicides across all demographics. Black males are 10 times more likely than white Americans to die by gun homicides. In 2020, this really struck me, 12,179 Black Americans were killed by guns, compared to 7,286 white Americans. What is troubling about this is that Black Americans make up about 12.5% of the population in this country. But in 2020, we represented 61% of all gun homicides. So let's kind of start there. I think that's really, kind of troubling, because we are debating this whole issue of easy access to the guns. Can we begin to address that through legislation, or how do we really address that issue when it really comes to the gun violence and disproportionately impacting us?
Now, thank you, Reverend Harrison. Now, let me first put the disclaimer in that I am for the right to bear arms. Okay. I'm definitely for that. In fact, I have probably 3.
Okay.
And so I am for the right to bear arms. I do have some serious problems with why do we need heavy artillery on the street? Artillery weaponry that you hunt deer with and wild game with. Why do we need that in the hands of individuals? I do have a problem with that. And really, I go as far as to say that I think law should be legislated that this type of weaponry cannot even be on the street. But then we flip it over, and I hear the argument, but yeah, they're just going to go to the black market. Well, let them go. My position is let them go to the black market. You still violating another law, because if it's not lawful to be on the street, then you turn around, you go into the black market and sell them unlawfully. Now we still got work to do. So those are startling numbers. Those are alarming numbers, and especially it seems like those facts or numbers are correct. We, as a black community, are over 5,000 something victims more than our other cultures. So I think we can begin to address this with getting these weaponry off the street that we don't need.
But you raise a good point, and this seems to be the debate. I would probably be more so in support of banning what they call assault rifles. Some call them assault weapons, AR-15s, those kind of weapons that we normally see used in school shootings or shootings in churches or public places. Those kind of mass shootings. But the divide in this country has made the conversation so difficult, and how do we move into a conversation where we can do things that make sense? It would seem like that's a starting place where, if we could ban the assault rifles, then it becomes a starting place. And I know, like you, they probably could be sold on the streets. But where do we start with this? Because the flow of guns that are flowing into the community, and a lot of them are unlawful, and we're not talking about, and I think people, who lawfully have guns, the percentage of them that kill is very low compared to the number who shouldn't have weapons because of a felony or those things. And I'm not for sure, Pastor Webster, where we start with this.
That's a good question, Pastor Harrison. I'm just going to be frank and blunt. I think we start with those who make our laws and our policies. I think we start with them by having a sensible, and I think what we have to do with legislators and community leaders, I think we really ought to have a real sit down, come to Jesus meeting with them to say, look, we're for the right to bear arms and our amendment rights, but as you read those numbers right there, again, we are over 5,000 something victims more.
Right.
And so we gotta, I think you start with saying the legislature, you and I doesn't make the law.
Right.
There are those that sit down town and even on Capitol Hill and legislate. Our communities have to me, have that conversation with our legislators to say, hey, look, you just said it, Pastor Harrison, what makes sense? Mm-hmm. And I think what makes sense is that these assault rifles, all of these should be outlawed, mm-hmm. and there should be consequences of once those that are caught with them. Yeah, I think we start there.
Yeah. I think we have to start somewhere. And I think there has to be a conversation, particularly from communities that are experiencing high levels of violence, that our viewpoints on this ought to be really considered, when we're impacted the most.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what concerns me, is that our voices are not being heard when we're impacted the most. I do a lot, as you know, with 10 Point, And I remember it was probably 2 summers ago. We were walking down Edgemont toward MLK, and there were several individuals that came from a particular house with assault rifles, and I don't know, apparently they wanted us to see that they had them. They wanted us to see that they had them.
Because they know y'all were 10 point.
Yeah, because they knew that we were 10 point. And I don't know about you, but those things, when I see them in public, in light of what's been going on with all the mass shootings and stuff, certainly makes people nervous. Yes. Yes. And we noticed that a lot of people were getting nervous in the neighborhood because of those assault weapons. And in Indiana, with the new law, you basically can walk around with them now. And there were some of them who were walking down the street, with those assault weapons, and it just made people nervous,
So, Pastor Harrison, can you walk around? Does the law outlaws the assault weapons, or you're telling me that in Indiana we can walk around with a assault a weapon like that?
Yeah, I think we can. They were walking around. Matter of fact, in one of the one of the Black Lives Matter movements rallies they had or marches they had, some of them had them out there on the street, and law enforcement was in the area. So yeah, they're walking around with them, and I think that's what's unnerving to people because of how quickly large numbers of people can be killed by those guns. And I know people are going to say, well, Reverend, you can take a handgun and do the same thing, putting a switch on it with an extended magazine. And that's a whole nother issue. But I do think, from my perspective, I feel uneasy, in some place where I see those kind of military weapons that are designed to kill.
Yeah, yesterday as we gathered in our conference to talk with our community about the violence in law enforcement, I think we said something yesterday that there have to be a starting point with law enforcement and community leaders around trust.
Right.
And so same thing applies here with legislators. We have to be able to get legislators to the table and stop thinking that we're gonna harm you and you're gonna harm us, and let's legislate laws that's gonna be good for the whole state and city. And right now, a good starting place. In fact, it came up yesterday, as you mentioned earlier, at our pre-press conference. One of the clergy brought it up about wanting to do something about and get these outlaw weapons off the street. Well, that's good, but I think we got to start with having a real conversation with those who make legislation, and then say to them, hey, here's our point of view. This is why we feel that these things need to be off the street. At least it's a good start. And then it begins to build trust with community and lawmakers.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison. And we're really talking about the whole issue of gun violence in America. Really it is a hot topic today in the country. So not just here in Indianapolis. And from the Black perspective, I think the concern is, and you keep hearing this talked about, the easy access to guns. Guns are easily accessible on the streets. And I'm just sometimes stunned at how young, these young people are who have them, and, some people say, you can get guns today as quickly and easy as you can buying drugs. And certainly that is concerning with the number of weapons that we see on the streets. And as we were looking at these numbers, this is just stunning, on a national level, that in 2020, 179 Black Americans were killed by guns compared to only about 7,200 whites. Those numbers are stunning to me.
That's alarming.
Yeah, when we only make up 12% of the population. So there does seem to be easy access in communities of color to these guns, particularly in urban cities.
Makes you wonder why. Have you ever grappled with the question why? I'm asking you.
Yeah. I have, wondered about that question of why, and why is there such a demand? What is the demand in communities of color for these guns that tend to lead to a lot of gun violence? We're just talking about the deaths. We're not talking about the number of those who are wounded by guns. Sir. Yeah.
I don't know. And as we said yesterday, I said again today, I think all of us are on the hook.
Right.
For the violence, the crime, though what we see in our city and state, all of us is on the hook for it. I think we got to run in our own lanes. And right now, this is a legislation piece that if they're willing to come out of the state houses off the Hill and talk to a community, talk to leaders, talk to citizens, they'll hear our hearts. I mean, they have their own ideology in terms, some do, in terms of thinking perhaps that we are infringing on their rights. But when you look at startling statistics like what you're just reading to us, that's baffling that over close to 6,000 more of us are dying. And like you said, it doesn't have to be assault rifles. What's driving the violence?
Yeah, I think that there, to be honest, there's the tension between rural and urban. And I think the rural communities who don't tend to have this kind of violence tends to push back, on those of us who may be advocating for some stricter gun laws, particularly when it comes to assault weapons. And, they see it more as an urban problem than, a rural issue. So that's where the tension lies. And where do we find common ground between rural and urban in this country?
Well, instead of looking at it from a rural urban medium, why not just look at it from a humanitarian perspective? And in doing that, that puts all of us on the hook. When you see children become the victims of mass shootings right now across our country, mass shootings are up,
right?
Especially in schools,
right? They're
up. And every mass school shooting, whether it's rural or urban, and in a lot of cases, it's rural.
Right.
And at the helm of these shootings are heavy artillery.
Yeah.
Guns and stuff that easy access to that should have been outlawed.
Right.
So when we try to spin it and make it a rural urban problem, we all look at it as a humanity problem, right, instead of just spinning it.
You probably have certainly a different perspective, being the president of the board of directors of the Pike Township school system. So you probably bring a perspective that is probably different from mine because of the responsibility you have to protect a lot of children.
Absolutely. And when you come in there, our perpetrators who have come in, these bullets doesn't have color on them.
Right.
They just go to spraying. And what's at the helm? Matter of fact, once our resource officers get there, and even the regular state police and city police, these guys are under siege because the perpetrator have just as more artillery than they have. In fact, in one shooting, they didn't have the police didn't have the protective gear, the glass or anything. this guy was just spraying, and then stopped and reloaded.
Right.
So somewhere legislators have to look at. We can't make this is not a white, black, urban, rural debate or battle. It's a humanitarian crisis, and we should be willing to look at that.
How do we then start this kind of conversation? Now, me and you are black leaders, and we tend to have relationships with leaders on both sides of the political aisle. Yeah. And it's a choice that we have made, to, work with those who are in authority. I think that's biblical.
That's Bible.
That's absolutely biblical. And
we would also pray for them.
Yes.
So we do that too.
Yeah. But I've had some conversations, and just recently, I think it was last week, I had a conversation with certain senators, and certainly they liked my conversation about, gun violence. It's a hard issue, but yet I understand for some whose hearts are not where they should be, to get a hold of these weapons could lead to a lot of people being killed, or someone being killed on the street, and I don't know how we go about this conversation where people can put their defenses down who believe in the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, including assault weapons, for them to see our perspective is that these weapons are being used by some in a evil and wicked way that kills a lot of human beings.
I think Pastor Harrison, again, we got to have an honest conversation with our lawmakers.
Right.
We got to do it. We got to be able to get them to the table. And good, bad, or indifference. We got to get to the table to talk about this problem that we have in our communities. And I think it starts with us getting to the table. It's not a white, black thing. It's a humanitarian crisis, and so I think that we got to get to the table with the lawmakers. It ain't no ifs and buts about it. The sessions, I think the sessions just ended.
They just ended, yes.
But certainly now would be the time to begin conversating with some of these senators for next session and begin to talk about what can we do? And it's not even so much as putting pressure on them. It's understanding our perspective, understanding their perspective or hearing their perspective, and then asking them to turn around and do what their community wants to do.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison. I don't fully understand the laws about do you need a gun license now to carry in Indiana if you don't have a felony? Can you just go purchase a gun now? That seems to be a debate. Some believe that's going to lead to more violence. I'm just not certain that we have seen the evidence yet that it has led to more violence than we were already seeing. But certainly, again, in my work with 10 Point, I see far more people now openly carrying guns, men and women, than I did, say, a couple years ago.
Well, I think that's definitely is going to be the result of a policy like that. So that you will definitely see that. I see that myself. I'm not quite sure, as you just said, that it has led to any uptick. Nothing that we haven't been on the path
right
already. I think that we again. It's another another senator legislator community conversation. Explain to us why that you felt that a law like a policy like that should go into effect. Help us to understand it.
I think for cities like Indianapolis, Evansville, Fort Wayne, Gary. I think that law doesn't work well for our communities in light of the level of violence that we are experiencing. And I think my conversation I would like to have is it may be good for the rest of the state, but it's not good for certain areas of the state. And ultimately, it may lead to even more violence. It certainly, in my opinion, is causing people to be more uneasy, because everybody's walking around with guns and with, the mindset that people have today and the fear, because I think a lot of people are fearful. When you see all these people with guns, you know that any kind of argument or dispute could lead to shots being fired in a place where you are. So I think certainly that concerns me. It's just the uneasiness that a lot of us feel now with so many people openly carrying these guns.
Yeah, one of the trepidations that I have about that is that once upon a time, if I brushed into you in the bathroom or coming out the bathroom or in a crowd or something, just a simple excuse me would suffice.
Right.
Now it's you stepped on my toe, you did this, right. You did that, which leads to something else. And which I oftentimes wonder, are you emboldened because you do have something with you? Would you be less courageous if you didn't? So these are all questions. And one of the things my wife always say to me now, and what I always try to do with others when I'm even teaching, I even now try to carry more of a level head. Okay. Because with so many others carrying now,
right,
you just never know what that may lead to.
And I say this, I'm not for sure the politicians having conversations with each other is going to resolve this. I think it's more moderate people like you and me, and there's others, throughout this city and state, may need to have conversations with, legislators on both sides of the aisle. Absolutely. To try to find, is there any common ground? Can we have some movement to have more, what I believe, common sense laws that help save lives on the street and frame it in a way like that, not wanting to take, people's guns away, but understand that there is a problem that certain segments of the state is facing, and how together can we try to find a solution and find common ground.
That's where I think we got to start. I want to go back to what we originally talked about earlier in statement. We gotta find a way to build trust in each other.
Okay.
Trust is the foundation that either builds a community or the lack thereof tear down anything. And so we got to where at one point we didn't think it was necessary, or in fact didn't even want to be sitting at the table with no lawmaker. I think now we got to do that, right, to get our hands around some of these issues.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. And we want to continue this conversation. And we, Pastor Webster, I would like to bring someone to sit down and talk with me and you who are on that other side. Maybe we can begin the conversation, here in this studio, and begin to have the conversation with some lawmakers or those who are proponents, of assault weapons, to begin at least having a dialogue, and maybe we can begin to start finding common ground.
I think that's a good place to start, Pastor Harrison.
This has been Real Talk with Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison. I hope you enjoyed this brief conversation today that we have had. And for those who are watching us on Facebook Live, please give us your comments. We certainly don't have all of the answers to these issues, but certainly we want to raise the issue and begin the dialogue about it. And we believe that this is an important conversation that we have to have here locally, statewide, and nationally because of the surging violence that we are seeing in America. We pray that you have enjoyed this conversation today, and we like to bring real issues that affect our community here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to subscribe, to this podcast and share it also on Facebook and Twitter. This is Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison. We pray that you have a blessed and awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.